Before we get started, I really want to say that this is going to be very long, very nerdy, and if you pick up any of these books, I promise you will never be the same person again. Now that the pleasantries are out of the way, let's just get straight into the top 13 books that I implore you to read in 2023. Let's get started. The very first book is Untethered Soul, and if you are already tempted to click off this video, I don't blame you, because the first time I heard this title, I thought it was probably some mid-western romance, and I got cowboy and horses vibes, and it's really not that. It's actually a philosophy book, and an amazing one. I would call this book a cure for stress, neuroticism and anxiety. So if any of these resonated with you, firstly, hi, and two, pick up this book. It genuinely will change your life. It provided me with perspectives that I had never had before, and I don't know how to explain this, but it felt as though it was kind of perfect for me, as in a lot of these mindsets resonate with Buddhism and with Alan Watts and with a lot of things that I'd been slowly accruing through the last 10 years of my life, but they were verbalized perfectly in this book. It has the best balance when it comes to me in terms of tough love and soft love, and in terms of morality and lack of morality, and questioning and not questioning, and acceptance and punishment, and just everything about it just felt the perfect Elizabeth balance. So if you find that our brains kind of work the same, it might also help you a lot. This book was a genuine escape for me. I've read it almost once a week for this whole year, and it kind of provided grounding. It became a coping mechanism or a safety net that I would return to whenever my anxiety levels would rise, or I would find myself re-spiraling, because I do think the things that are mentioned in the book are absolutely amazing, but they are so contrary to how I am naturally, and I tend to be, I think, a bit more of a tightly wound up and anxious person. As the book also says itself, the one who notices is already free, and even though I cannot completely transform myself overnight, or as I finish this book, into this calm, collected and kind of meditative and accepting person, I think the path of recognizing that I am perhaps doing things in a way that makes me sadder or more anxious or more neurotic is freedom within itself. I can't do the book full justice in a few seconds, but I just want to mention that it's kind of centered around the view that we are separate to what we are thinking, feeling and experiencing. And this is also what one of my favorite poets, John O'Donoghue, says when he mentions there's always a part of you that has never been hurt. And I think this is what this book does. It kind of expands in that space, which is safe and happy and pleasant and calm and relaxed, and kind of lets it take over in a way and helps you create systems and ways of perceiving things and viewing the world that makes you get closer and closer, I think, to that calm acceptance and that separation from all the negative feelings that one might experience in their life. As Jeanette Winterson said, to be ill-adjusted to a deranged world is not a breakdown. And therefore I'm really happy when I find books like this, which make the act of living life and taking upon challenges just a bit easier and help me rebalance myself and understand myself a bit better and perceive the world differently. This book does what John O'Donoghue says that we should be focusing more on, and I agree with, which is not the view of who I should be or what I should be, but how I should be. And I think it's very easy to take on challenges and to take on specific goals, but to not focus in the meantime on how we are and how we experience things. And I think this is what this book gives us, the ability to take upon challenges and to do what we're currently doing, or try to experience more, while at the same time trying to be a bit more humble, centered, calm, less anxious and less tightly wound up, which is a slight projection, of course. So if your brain works anything like mine, I think this book, if you can get over the cringe of the title, is an absolute must, and I would genuinely recommend it as consistent reading in the background on top of everything else. The second book I'm going to recommend is my favourite fictional book of the year, which is Project Hail Mary, which very surprisingly I fell in love with, given that it's a sci-fi book, and I was never into the sci-fi genre. I never properly got into Star Wars as a child, and then I thought, that ship has sailed, I'm too old for this, I don't think I'm going to be into this weird stuff, but it's actually brilliant, and I think it's perfect for me, and I had never realised. This book was a recommendation from my YouTube comments, so thank you so much to the person who did that, because it changed my life. So good. The reason that I realised that sci-fi is actually incredible is that the core thing on which sci-fi is woven is not actually weird stories and aliens and kind of end of the world things that I thought, but I mean, it is that, but the core of it, I think, is a deep desire to understand humanity, and there's so much philosophy and psychology in it. As we put people in these extreme decisions of end of the world, kids are dying, everyone's burning, world is going down, there's that side of seeing human beings at the extreme and what then lies underneath in our core once the daily interests and the daily issues and the daily problems and stresses are stripped away. But on the other level, it's kind of a consistent thought experiment. And I love the thought experiment of what would aliens think if they saw us doing something, because I love doing that. So I think sci-fi kind of collected this and captured this really, really well. The way that I picture it is that the independent variable in this book is how much emotion we are putting into it and how much we are assuming we know about people. And as these varies, there are levels when we take away all of our emotion and we take away all our assumptions for humanity, and we're left with this dependent variable of what it means to be human and what's the reality behind that. In this book, we question things such as morality, what is good, what is bad, what is love, what is death, and even question behaviors like, why do we take turns? Is that a universal thing? Why do these even make sense? And in doing so, very interestingly, while having this almost dispassionate, detached, stressed, curious analysis of humanity, for some reason I ended up the book feeling more emotional and human and empathetic than ever. It was such a beautiful journey into what it means to be a person and to be alive, and I would genuinely recommend it so much. And then on top of that, you have the benefit of having a sprinkle of science and physics, and especially astrophysics, which is my favorite, which kind of keeps your interests in the book really, really high. So this was absolutely beautiful. I will admit I almost cried at one point that I don't want to spoil, but if you are into fiction at all, and if especially you have not read sci-fi and you're like me and you think you wouldn't like it, try this. It's so good. So good. Incredible. So yeah. The next book is Creativity, the Psychology of Discovery and Invention, which is based on the idea that in general, humans seem to have gone from a state of thinking that the gods had created us to thinking that we have actually created the gods, and we've taken upon ourselves this title of creator with not exactly the full responsibility or insight or curiosity or passion to understand or do it well. And therefore, it's kind of a very interesting exploration into work and productivity and creativity and discovery in general. This book is written by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, which, if you're like me and you've read a lot about work and organization and flow, you know this name comes up again and again. He is one of the biggest scientific researchers and one of the biggest names in the literature of flow and productivity, and so his name was coming up again and again in so many different books. So I had to go to his own written book, which is actually quite old at this stage, but it's so insightful and interesting. As a lot of people, I think, in my audience are kind of scientific and would potentially not identify with being creative, which we very often associate with fluffy things like dance and music and painting and drawing and scribbling and all that stuff, I've divided the benefits of this book into two groups: the cynical, so the science productivity-ish person, and then also the romantic, so the creative person. So when it comes to the cynic, I would read this book because it really, really focuses on the positive aspects of creativity and how this can be applied to any sort of task that you do. I'm talking about things like flow, about passion in your subject, about finding new and alternative ways of solving problems, of being obsessed with a thing that you are doing, of maintaining your passion and curiosity about work that doesn't need to be creative in the long term. So all of these can be taken by people like Michelangelo or Einstein, or people who were fully obsessed with their subjects, achieved things to a very high level, but were also very, very creative in the solutions and the things that they found and did. And on the other hand, we have the romantic, and this is the person, I identify a lot with a romantic, this is the person who just kind of loves art but potentially doesn't see themselves as creative, and who wants to have a bit more newness and to experiment with things in their life. As Csikszentmihalyi says, the world is actually our business. And this basically means that everything is ours to explore. We don't need to label ourselves as a mathematician or a physician or a philosopher or a painter or a podcaster in order to do these things, but we can just have genuine curiosity and dabble with them. And as someone who always gets intimidated about talking about subjects that I'm not an expert in, I think this advice is absolutely beautiful. And the benefit of this is the cross-pollination and therefore the creativity that you can have in your main subjects or topics that you are working in. Beyond the specific productivity advice, Csikszentmihalyi also recommends that we keep exploring what it means to be different to who we are. And this open-mindedness, this lack of gatekeeping for so many beautiful aspects of human nature is absolutely incredible. He also really convinced me to look more into literature and the arts, because unlike other more scientifically based subjects, these are things where over a lifetime I can improve thousands and thousands and times over, as for example a poet or as a painter or as a singer or as a musician, and I would still have thousands of times of improvement space, because these are kind of endless subjects to explore, and therefore they are really, really interesting for all of us to have some sort of endless source of creativity in our life to keep us going and to keep improving in. Next is the book Love by Jeanette Winterson, and I've been looking everywhere for it because I have a physical copy, but I think I've given it to someone to read. And so I bought Liberty by Virginia Woolf, which is another vintage mini, because I just want to show you the size of this book to convince you to please get it, because they're quite small, they have really big text, and they are so interesting. Love by Jeanette Winterson is a collection of her thoughts and her other pieces of writing on love, and it is undescribable. I don't have words for how beautiful, impactful, and emotional this writing is. It's really, really short, but I think that this woman is someone who has been just so fortunate for the rest of us to exist, in the sense of how insightful she is, how strongly and deeply she experiences things and tests things out, but also how much she then reflects on them, and her gift and talent and work into writing and expressing things is not, there's no words for it. I think she does so well something that is called, wait, let me find the specific term. There's something in psychiatry called the unknown thought, which is basically things that you don't have words for, you don't even know that you're experiencing, but are definitely there. And what people like her do is kind of make me realize all of that, and she just pulls back the curtain on so much feelings that I had never processed or never understood, and you feel so connected to someone through things that are admittedly very, very painful, and to the extent that we potentially have never shared with anyone, or have been even too embarrassed to admit to ourselves when it comes to the complexities of relationships and love. She explores not only romantic love, but she explores also parent and child love, and I just cannot express how beautiful this little and emotional, and how much content and value there is in this tiny book. I'm going to read one very little kind of extract from it, just to give you an idea of the way that she writes and the parallels that she draws. So she said, this is super short, but she says, so this is about a mother talking about her son. I should have named him after a stagnant pond, and then I could have kept him, but I named him after a river, and in the flood tide he slipped away. So it's talking about the realization of a mother that a child would leave, and this parallel between being a pond or a river. Just so beautiful. She incredibly talented, would definitely recommend. So cathartic, so beautiful, so poetic, absolutely incredible. 100 out of 10 would recommend this book. Next, and I actually do have a physical copy of this, is A Vindication on the Rights of Women by Mary Wollstonecraft. Now, this is the OG feminist kind of book. So it's first wave feminism. It was written in the 1700s, so I think it's 1792, I believe. 1792 was when it was first published, and this is incredible. A must read. Now, I will admit I did not know a lot about feminism, and I've kind of obviously knew the basics of it, but I think in very recent years it has taken some interesting twists and turns, a lot of which I completely disagree with, and I therefore kind of I think I just got confused, I guess, with the situation and everything that's unfolding in the space, and therefore I thought, actually, let me clear my thoughts and go back to the original. So this is where feminism started. This is the issues that were being faced at the time, and how they were expressed, and how they were verbalized, and what was identified, and what the solutions were proposed at the time. So this is where it started. So I thought, I don't know what to do right now, I'll just go back to the start. So this is why I picked up this book. It is so good. This version of it is super cool because it's quite like nice and small, so I can just fit it in my bag, and I've been reading it when I'd had to travel long journeys to and back from hospital, so it's been a great read for that reason. This book is of course incredible given the time that it was written, and it is a wonderful source of understanding and grounding on what can be very, very complex topics. I'm going to mention one thing that I love from her perspective, where she says that independence is the basis of every virtue, which basically states that if one is forced to behave in a certain way, they are not a virtuous person because it's not coming inherently. So if someone has no other option other than to be virtuous, they are not technically virtuous. But it's absolutely beautiful, and there's obviously a lot of translations into not necessarily just the history and the politics of the issue, but also understanding more about one's own life and one's own understanding, even generalizing to self-respect and to the way that we perceive ourselves and how we live our lives. Some small thing that I really like about this is that Mary herself, there's a bit in the book that talks about her personal history, and I found it very reassuring, and this might be super random, but the fact that when it came to her personal life, of course she was a very forward-thinking, independent, incredible woman. When it came to her personal life, she actually faced a lot of issues in her personal relationships with her partner and with her husband. She kind of, I guess, was not as feminist as she potentially would have liked, or it kind of contradicted her thoughts. And I found this, of course, to be quite painful because she did go through a lot of emotional pain, I'm sure, in her relationships, but also found it to be quite reassuring in that one can have political views and thoughts and beliefs that are necessary, not congruent with their behavior, because especially when it comes to emotional matters or matters of the heart, one can still behave in ways that are regrettable and not exactly the ideal of what they would like themselves to believe. So I found that to be very, very reassuring that even a woman like her, of course not ideal, went through a lot of relationship struggles, but otherwise incredible book, really, really good. I'd go back to the OG if you're also, like me, completely baffled as to where this movement and direction has gone at the moment. The next book I want to recommend is Organised Chaos, which is actually my book. I wrote a book this year. It was super impulsive, and it was kind of a moment where I snapped and thought, no, I need to do this. And I just felt very, very strongly about a particular concept when it came to work and organising oneself and the way that one views oneself and makes things happen. And so I just sat down and wrote this book, and I'm very, very happy with it. I think only months and months later now, with all the feedback and all the emails, I'm comfortable enough to actually say it did quite well and I back it. And it was a really, really good and life-changing experience for me, myself, making it, but also for, I guess, for, according to what I've been told by also other people who have gotten this book. I don't want to linger on this book too much and unfairly, but I just want to say that Organised Chaos is about the chaotic, impatient, kind of distractible, can't get things done sort of person who has tried and failed so much, like me, with kind of general work advice and time blocking and sit down and just do it and habits and things like that. And it's an alternative to making these things happen, because I think trying and failing and feeling terrible my whole life to stick to the mainstream advice and then going the complete opposite direction. And now, for example, I am a full-time medical student and I run this channel completely by myself and all of these things, and manage to have a personal life and all this stuff using tips that are more chaotically organized rather than mainstream and habit focused, is just the way that I managed to live what can be considered a more balanced and a happier life. So that's what the book is about. If you're anything like me, maybe it might be also helpful for you, but I'm going to move swiftly on now. Next book recommendation is Attachment in Psychotherapy, and this is 10 out of 10. It is so good. Please, please, please make the time to read books like this. So this was prompted by a series of other books that I read. So basically, you've probably heard of Attached. Attached is great. It's a book about your attachment style in romantic relationships, whether you are secure or you are avoidant or you are preoccupied, and it's really, really helpful in identifying what sort of approach you have to interpersonal relationships and how then that might dictate the kind of people you are attracted to or the sort of issues or progression of relationships. And it's really, really great. But Attached is a pop psychology book still. It's still just like an expansion and interpretation of what's actually very well established science. Where I thought that this might help me is more with the book that I'm recommending, which is Attachment in Psychotherapy, which is actually a book for therapists. And I know this is quite high level, but let me make my argument here. I really think that attachment styles extend a lot farther than our romantic relationships, but they form the basis of who we think we are and how we interpret things that are happening in the world, and especially things that are happening with us. There's attachment that we have to friends, to family members, to people at work, to people in romantic relationships, to our own children, and especially when it comes to intergenerational trauma and kind of the effects that we had for the maladaptive ways perhaps that we were raised, can very easily, and there's a lot of evidence to show that unless these are addressed, these are things that we are then giving onto our children, and they are not ideal. I find that a lot of my distress, a lot of my anxieties, my insecurities, my issues when it comes to my life stem at the core from a problem with attachment. And so this has been something that I have been tackling head on this year, and it's honestly one of the most difficult, interesting, amazing and life-changing things one can do to their psychology and their experience of life. Honestly, the most important thing. Like, screw productivity, screw my book, just pick this up because it's so incredible. So this book is actually targeted towards therapists, as I mentioned, but the explanations are incredible. The understanding is so in-depth. It is brilliant. And especially if you are someone who has been wanting to go to therapy for a while, but for whatever reason is unable to, this might perhaps be a more affordable solution or a start, not a replacement for, but a step towards this thing. In the end of the day, if you find that you perhaps overreact to things sometimes or are unhappy with the way things unfold in your life, I would pick up this book and see if anything in it resonates with you or makes sense to you, because it might just change everything. Would 100 million out of 10 recommend. The next book is Reaching Down the Rabbit Hole, and this is my first medical book actually that I'm recommending. This is a mainstream medical book because it's equally good, I think, for pre-medics or for the general population as it is for medical students. I'm not going to speak for doctors, I'm not one yet, so let's pause that there. But I read it before I even went to medical school, and I reread it last year. Reaching Down the Rabbit Hole is a collection of different stories from people who have had very rare and unique trauma or medical conditions or impairment to their brain. So these are clinical conditions that are so interesting to see, and obviously that have huge consequences on both the families and also the interactions between doctors. And so looking into this, I think one, of course, makes one very, very grateful for their own existence and whatever health that we do have ourselves, but also it kind of helps us peek into what life can look like otherwise and what it may look for certain people. And also, I think, as always, it kind of increases your empathy and increases your love for taking care of people, and in my instance, my love for medicine. It's great to read if you are a medic especially, and if you are not, it kind of gives you these really interesting stories, some easy and fun way to learn medical terms and to have a peek into what health looks like and what interactions between doctors and patients look like. So Reaching Down the Rabbit Hole is really, really cool. And if you have some kind of morbid fascination with things like maybe true crime or maybe issues like that, this is a interesting kind of dark but empathetic view into what it means to be human when there is lack of health and how we try to manage and understand it, especially when it is very, very unique, different and unknown. So brilliant book. The next book I'm going to recommend is A Decent Life, Morality for the Rest of Us. And this is a lazy guide to living a modern moral life. So basically, if you are the sort of person who is kind of interested in philosophy, but very quickly kind of shuts it off when it gets a bit much, and when you feel that it's quite difficult to actually be completely moral today, and there are so much that is being asked of us in terms of, should we kind of not be flying, or how much should you recycle, or do you be a vegan? Do you have to be a vegan? And what is our kind of effect on and impact on the environment or on homelessness? And there's so many issues to care about that it feels very, very easy to just, and I admit I've done this often myself, to just go, you know what, I'm just gonna turn it off because I don't know what to do. So if you've caught yourself in that position once or twice, I think this is a really good book to read because it's very palatable, reasonable, and it's very well written. It's kind of lazy guide to being moral today. It's based on the view of decency, so even though it touches on things like deontology or virtue ethics and different moral theories that are classical, it then lands on something which is decency, basically the view that you should treat other people as though they are also people with needs. And that sounds really simple, and it kind of is, but it's surprising as to how many solutions this has in terms of both kind of individual one-on-one interactions, but also kind of thinking about policies and extending things beyond the individual onto the group. So it's an absolutely beautiful read. As the book says, there's no limit to what morality can ask of us, but the aim should not be that one maximizes our benevolence in every instance, but rather that one attempts to find ways in which one might be benevolent. So with this aim in mind, this is a great philosophy book if you are into that stuff. The next book is one that I'm going to be honest, I wasn't sure whether or how to properly include or mention, but in reality, it's a book that has greatly changed my perspective and I've really found important this year, so I thought I would mention. It's Racism Without Cists. And this is a book that I'm definitely not the best person to speak of, but I'll just mention the things that stood out to me the most. It provided an education and a painful to read perspective that I did not have access to in the past, and it also provided a view that I found very helpful and very interesting, in the sense that the argument of the book is that it's not helpful to kind of label people as being something, because then they might feel that, well, I'm not a bad person, I'm not that thing, rather, and they kind of shut this off, and then there's no discussion to be had or no changes to be made. One of my favorite psychologists, and he's not related to the book, is Dr. Kirk Honda, and he says something which I truly believe, which is that it is impossible for people to be born in and raised in a system which is directed in a certain way and to not be impacted by this system. And this is something to constantly keep in mind. It talks about prejudices and discrimination, especially in the context of the group or in structural based systems, rather than purely leaving responsibility on the individual. This is one of the books on the list that, even though I'm not American or have ever been in America yet, I think would be a great read and a very, very important set of learning points, and definitely a book that I will be returning to again, just because of how much empathy, insight, understanding and information it lends to the reader, and so I would greatly, greatly recommend it. Next is Stephen Hawking's The Great Design. I feel like every year there's a Stephen Hawking book that just is so great. I feel as though I don't have a lot to do with astrophysics or physics anymore in my life, and it used to be my favourite subject in school, so I do have a very soft spot for it. But also, I think there's just something so philosophical and a different approach to philosophy that I find in physics, in that it kind of gives answers, and very, very interesting answers that are very often quite intellectually challenging when it comes to understanding them, but also just so beautiful and such an escape to read and to learn. And I feel like there is nothing more interesting than actually learning about the space that we occupy and where we are in the universe and in the world, and what we know about how things have potentially come to be, and just how much more insightful, grateful and interested we can be around things that surround us due to this. So as a nihilistic physics and philosophy nerd, it's a 10 out of 10 for me. My 13th and last book is Stillborn, which is also another fictional book. Now, this is one that I'm not going to focus on for too long because I have a whole long video with my summary and thoughts on it. Basically, it's a very, very emotional book around childbirth and loss and relationships and interactions, and there's just so much to be learned from it. The reason that I'm going to focus on this less than the others is that in 2023, I've kind of decided to create a little book club with summary, very casual videos where I just sit down and rant about my favourite parts, a summary of my learning points in the books that I read. And because this rambly, long informational content does not lend itself too well to YouTube, and I don't want to completely trash the algorithm on this channel, I am uploading them onto an algorithmic and ad-free platform, which is Nebula. Nebula is a platform created by educational YouTubers and creators in general, where there's no ads, there's no distractions, there's no algorithm, so you go to watch what you want to watch and then you can just leave. And this is the perfect space for me to upload these videos. The summary of Stillborn is already up, and I'm currently working on summaries of some of the books that I've mentioned today, and hopefully a lot more books that I'll be reading in the new year. So if you are interested on my takes on books, or kind of want a shortcut to getting some information, or want to compare notes with what resonated with us, there'll be a link in my description which will give you access to Nebula. The best way to get Nebula is to sign up for CuriosityStream, which is a wonderful streaming platform for documentaries. As I mentioned, if you're also nerdy into science things, there's a lot of science and physics and universe documentaries there to watch, which provide a lot more insight than I can verbally give in this video, or in a different way with a lot of amazing, I feel like the visuals and the sound effects in universe documentaries or nature documentaries in general just provide a sort of blessing for the eyes that I can get from my bed and my bedroom in London, which I otherwise would be quite more logistically messy to have access to. Now, I very guiltlessly promote CuriosityStream and Nebula because the price for both of these for a whole year is literally the price of a takeaway. But it's a very reasonable package that adds so much to my yearly learning experience that I would genuinely very much recommend it. But otherwise, there'll be a link in my description for the discount for CuriosityStream and Nebula, and also I'll probably link all of the books that I mentioned if that is helpful. Otherwise, if you made it to the end of this video, you are definitely a nerd. Congratulations. And thank you so much for watching. I would love actually book recommendations, because Project Hail Mary, other books of the sort have been the most incredible change to my life. So please, please, please leave them below if you resonated with this. And especially if you made it so far, please just let me know what your favorite book is. This is not a comment for the algorithm. This is I genuinely want to know. But otherwise, thank you so much for making it so far. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Be kind to yourself and others, and don't believe everything you think. Bye.